What do all these images up here have in common? They all have very graphic video game violence. Video games are among one of the most popular forms of entertainment nowadays. Video games consist of multiple genres of games and thousands of different titles. We constantly buy video games and spend endless hours playing them all. So can these types of games influence the way we behave and interact? Today I want to illustrate to you the popularity of violent video games in society, how it's desensitizing us to acts of violence. Then I'll show you the negative effects it has on society. Have you ever walked into a GameStop among the many rows of video games stacked on shelves with all the different types of genres, but one genre trumps all others, which brings me to my first point. Violent video games are the most popular video games on the market. In an article on Procon.org, it states in 2008 alone, 10 of the top 20 best-selling video games in the US contain some type of violence. This list up here, as it states, a list of the 8 best-selling video games on the Xbox 360 console that sold over 5 million copies. Seven of the eight, all contain large amounts of graphic violence. The video game industry is an $11 billion industry in domestic sales alone. The video game market revenue for 2012 was $78.5 billion worldwide. This shows how much people spend buying video games all over the world, how much we spend buying a game, buying accessories, add-ons, and everything else on top of that. This brings me to my next point. Now that you know how popular violent video games are, let's look at how it's desensitizing us to violent acts. Violent video games are causing today's youth to become desensitized to acts of real violence. First-person shooter games are essentially teaching kids how to learn how to shoot and kill without any hesitation, as if it were second nature. In the game Call of Duty, any Call of Duty series, the main objective is to take out, the enemy, terrorists, but in multiplayer is killing each other. And the first thing, if you react to someone coming around the corner, your first reaction is to kill them right away. No interaction other than that. Teaching us our first reaction to just kill someone. Secondly, this is an excerpt from the 2008 study conducted by Dr. Cheryl K. Olson and Lawrence Kuttner, Grand Theft Childhood. In 1995, David Grossman wrote the book on killing, the psychological cost of learning to kill in war and society. It was based on his experience as an Army Ranger and as a teacher at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He claimed direct connections between training in values and methods of killing that military recruits receive and what children experience through shooter video game play. He saw point-and-shoot video games as simulators for practicing murders. In an article titled, "Do Violent Video Games Contribute to Youth Violence?" it states, "Violent video games often reward players for stimulating violence and thus enhance the learning of violent behaviors. Studies also suggest that when violence is rewarded in video games, players exhibit increased aggressive behavior compared to players of video games where violence is punished." That's just a scene from Call of Duty, where you're shooting at your other people. Alright, if video games reward you for being violent, what could that do to society? And finally, I'd like to show you the negative effects video games have on society today. In the book Growing Up Fast and Furious, Reviewing the Impacts of Violent and Sexualized Media on Children by Craig Anderson and Wayne Warburton, it says, in the book Growing Up Fast and Furious, Reviewing the Impacts of Violent and Sexualized Media on Children, it states, similarly, there is a consensus among the vast majority of violent video game researchers that too much exposure to violent video games increase the likelihood of aggressive thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, which lead to desensitization to violence and also leads to decreases in prosocial behaviors and empathy. In London, shortly after the midnight launch of Grand Theft Auto V on September 17, 2013, a 23-year-old British man was hit in the head with a brick and stabbed by three British teens, the ages 14, 15, and 17, who robbed him and stole his Grand Theft Auto copy. This shows that these games can cause us to do senseless acts of violence just to get us anything we want so we don't have to pay for it. And third, studies have even confirmed that violent video games do in fact increase aggression levels in all areas, even only after a short period of time. A study was conducted by Chris Bartlett of the Iowa State University. 47 undergraduates played Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance for 15 minutes. After they tested students to see if they behaved more aggressively by telling them they would be doling out hot sauce to a student who didn't like spicy foods but had to swallow the sauce. The students who played Mortal Kombat were violent in all areas across the board. They were shown to have given the student a very significant amount of hot sauce. When I finish playing Grand Theft Auto V, usually I'm very short with people, a lot more aggressive, and I get set off real easy on the smallest things. And for my conclusion, so today I've talked about the popularity of violent video games in society, how it's desensitizing us to acts of violence, and I've showed you the negative effects it has on society. As you can see, violent video games do cause aggressive behaviors in people who play them and desensitize us to violent acts. Thank you.
Jesus, what do you think?
He had a nice and touching grammar, but he really got me because I really hate his subject because I think games are okay, just saying. He introduces his topic great, and his transitions are pretty good, but the bad things I found were he reads off his cards too much. The paper was kind of distracting. You kind of cited too many things. Like, I would want to hear more of like your point of view on the subject rather than reading off quotes. And you kind of use the photos as a guideline, as you said before. It's really that you should actually just go into it instead of using the pictures as the guideline. And his conclusion was great.
Okay. The visualizations that you're using at the beginning, I mean, basically you have all the images up there, and then we're going to just scroll through them. They're a little hard to see at the beginning. As they come up individually, that's fine. But if you're going to use that as your attention device, they really need to be something that are easy to pick out. And I couldn't, it was hard to see any of the individual things. I could see the one guy's face as he was playing the game, so I know that's up there. But that, like I said, later on, that's one of your supporting points. So it just feels like everything's up there at the beginning and nothing is being used to draw our attention. The things that work best, I think, you kind of ask the question, whether or not it has an impact, and it sounds to me like your purpose statement is really going to be an attempt to answer that question. So I thought you did okay with that, and I thought that there was a good preview of what the supporting structure was going to be, so that helped quite a bit. I appreciated all the sources that you cited, and I thought that you had a lot of information in the speech. There were a couple of times when it was problematic because it's so much reading, and sometimes the reading doesn't make much sense. The hot sauce study, for instance, needs to be clarified. Maybe you need to paraphrase it or simply explain what it was that they were doing. Or maybe there's a direct quote that summarizes it, because as it just came across, I found a little bit confusing. Another thing that was confusing, you gave us the source citation 2 times back to back at one point, and it just seemed like you're reading and you're not even thinking about what you're reading in that situation. And I know that you've prepared and I know you've got the research there, but you have to think about, well, what am I saying to the audience? And that felt like one of those times that I was taken out of the speech, and it's not you speaking, it's just you reading in that situation, and you just slipped a page, you had another link there, and that just made it feel a little bit awkward. It's pretty well organized during the presentation, and I did think that the transitions were very clear. I like that. The visuals are fine. They don't do a lot to add to our understanding of the subject, but they do make it a little bit more interesting. It seems to me like some of those studies would have found some statistical results. That might have been an easy way to illustrate a couple of those points. As I think has been mentioned, there's a lot of reading. I thought that you had a pretty good summary, and you have a good exit line, but you're stepping on your exit line with your delivery. If you'd practiced it like you were talking to us and you just say the answer to your question, it's going to sound a lot more powerful and sincere. As it is, we're back to the reading sort of thing. And I know our emphasis was not heavily on delivery in this situation, but it's one of those things that it just seems like additional practice would solve that problem. And I think that that's where you needed to maybe work on this speech a little bit more. All right, thank you.